Hey, welcome back, students. So today we're doing strategy 3 of the TABE language E text, the score boost text. Again, you should have a paper copy of this. It's the green E level. And if you don't have a paper copy of this, it's available to you here in the Canvas course. Simply navigate over to the left side and look for the Files menu. Click on that, and the folder is TABE language E pages. And you'll see each of the lessons there that you can open up and follow along. But today we're going to start on strategy 3, and it begins on page 12 of your text. And kind of like I've done so far, I'll be going through the instructional part of this content, skipping over any activities as I talk about the material. But I'll have a second video where I go through and go over the answers to the questions, to the activities, so that you get a full breakdown of how to get those answers. It's important to watch both parts. There's just as much teaching in the answer videos as there is in these videos. Okay, so strategy 3, writing correct sentences. This is a longer lesson. It's about the same length as the one we did previously in strategy 2. So if the video gets too long for you to do in one session, it's perfectly okay to watch it over 2 sessions, to break it up to how it works for your schedule. Okay, so this lesson is about sentence structure in some important ways, like how we put sentences together. But we start off with taking a deeper dive or deeper look into adjectives and adverbs with our comparative and superlative forms. And this is something that seems pretty complicated to talk about, but it's something that we learn to do pretty early on, and we do it in speech rather easily. But it takes a little bit of thought and a little bit of intentionality to be able to do it well in writing or on a test. So I'm going to read through the material here, and I'll stop and talk about some things as we go. So form comparative and superlative adjectives and adverbs. And by the way, comparative means you're showing similarity between two things. But if we're looking at adjectives and adverbs, it is a level more intense. So in other words, something that is good in comparative form becomes better. Something that is sick in comparative form becomes sicker, and so on. So comparative adjectives, and superlative. Superlative is the tip top. So good, better, superlative is best. All right, sick, comparative, sicker, superlative, sickest. And superlative means the supreme, the top one. So it's always going to be that EST that we reserve for the one that is ranked at the top. Okay, comparative adjectives and comparative adverbs compare two things. And remember, adjectives modify nouns and adverbs modify verbs. You can easily spot a comparative adjective or adverb because the suffix er is often at the end of the word. If an adjective or adverb ends in a y, simply change the y to an I before adding the er. So silly that ends with a y, when we want to turn it into sillier, we need to change that y to an I. Other times, the adjective or adverb might have the word less or more in front of it. It will never have both er and less or more. So the less or more is taking care of the comparative form. You don't need an er suffix, otherwise you've repeated yourself. For example, you would not say, my sister is more taller than I am. You would just say, my sister is taller than I am. All right, superlative adjectives and superlative adverbs compare more than two things. So now we're dealing with the top, the number one rank, the EST. So instead of ER, the adjective or adverb will likely end in EST. For superlatives, if the adjective or adverb ends in a Y, simply change the Y to I before adding the EST. It was just like it was in the comparative form. So I said silly becomes sillier with an I instead of a Y. Well, it becomes silliest with an I instead of a Y. If you do not see the est at the end, the adjective or adverb will have least or most in front of it. This is the superlative equivalent of less or more. It will never have both est and least most. For example, you would not say Paul is the most slowest boy on the track team. You would say he is the slowest boy on the track team. And lastly, we have a rule here about when you use the most or least as opposed to just the regular ly, or I'm sorry, the est. So it tells us when an adverb ends in ly, like slowly, we always use less or more to form the comparative adverb. So, we wouldn't say the slowliest, right? We would say he moved the least slowly or the most slowly. Okay. Here we have a bunch of examples here. So first of all, comparative adjectives. We just add er. Short becomes shorter. Kara is shorter than Mia. If it is irregular, we can't add an er. We don't say I was afraider than Jose. A lot of times those are the way they are because they're just so hard to pronounce. So we would say I was more or less afraid than Jose. But certainly don't say I was more afraid-er because then you've repeated yourself. Okay, and then we have superlative adjectives. These modify nouns or describe nouns. So roses are the prettiest flowers. So pretty becomes prettiest in superlative form. We've changed the Y to an I. It's a noun, flowers, that's being described. So clearly an adjective. But of course, we also have some that will take least or most, just like in comparative form, less or more. So we wouldn't say math is my... I can't even form it. Math is my least favorite subject. All right. The only thing I can come up with that would show a bad example is math is my worstest subject, which shows, again, kind of the impossibility of forming it that way. Okay, comparative adverbs. These are modifiers that describe verbs. So let's see here. Yuki ran slowly would have been the original adverb, but we're dropping the Y and adding the ER. So Yukio ran slower than Keith. If it said Yukio ran more quickly than Keith, then we might assume that quick is the adverb. And here we have an example of the more and least kind here. She finished the test more quickly than I did. We wouldn't say quicklier. Sounds bad and doesn't make a lot of sense. And then lastly, superlative adverbs. This is reserved for the number one ranked verb, I should say, in the sentence. So Carlene jumped the highest. It's describing jumped, the verb jumped, and we're told that it was the highest out of all. Baseball is the least dangerous sport that Evan plays. We wouldn't say baseball is let's just say, well, if we wanted to rephrase this without having to use more or least, we could say baseball is the safest sport that Evan plays. And that's a good tip. So if you get in a situation where you're not sure if it should be more or least, and you're not sure if you should change the adverb itself, then switch the sentence. This applies to when you're writing. Just express it in the opposite way. So, baseball is the least dangerous. How about we just say in the real world, baseball is the safest sport that Evan plays. Okay, in our example, Tom worked harder. That is comparative, regular form, and it is an adverb that's describing worked here. But she got the highest grade. So here we have a superlative adjective that is describing grade, the noun. All right, I'm going to skip past the activities because you're going to do those on your own and come back when you've finished and we'll go over them. Okay, the second section is about conjunctions, and we're leading to the end of this. We're going to learn about sentence structure and how some of these parts come together to form or to structure sentences. But conjunctions, by the way, are another part of speech. So, like a couple of lessons ago, we talked about nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns. Conjunctions are another type of speech. What do? Well, connections are words that help you connect ideas. They make your writing more interesting and easier to understand. The word conjoin means to connect, to bring together. Conjoined twins are connected together. And the same meaning with a conjunction in grammar. It's things that are connected together. But we have different types, and we're going to look at two types today. Coordinating conjunctions connect two parts of a sentence. It's almost kind of like a plus sign or something. We're bringing two parts of a sentence together. Those parts are considered to be of equal value. It says, unless they are two short related parts, a comma is generally placed before the coordinating conjunction. The 7 coordinating conjunctions are and, but, for, nor, or, so, and yet. So maybe you've learned this, maybe you haven't, but remember fanboys. That's an acronym that covers these 7 coordinating conjunctions. This list is not in that order. I think they give you the tip down here. But the acronym fanboys will help you remember these coordinating conjunctions. I hate to tell you this, but this might be a list of things you're going to have to memorize, these 7. Because knowing them will help you determine whether sentences are written correctly on the TABE test and on the GED test itself. It's a skill that you really need to have. And unfortunately, it requires a little bit of memorizing here in this. But the important thing is that when we're using coordinating conjunctions to join or conjoin sentences, we have to have a comma that comes before them. And we're going to see that, of course, in the examples below. Subordinating conjunctions, they work much the same way. They bring together parts of sentences, they connect. But what happens is they make one clause, and we haven't talked about what a clause is, but it's a grammatical unit that has a subject-verb relationship. Some sentences are clauses, but not all clauses are sentences. But they make one clause dependent on another or subordinate to another. So an independent clause can stand on its own as a complete sentence. I walked home. A dependent clause cannot. So let's see here. Pause that. Hold that thought for just a second. Okay, so in the same way that coordinating conjunctions bring parts of a sentence or clauses in a sentence together that can stand alone, subordinating conjunctions bring together parts that are different. One can be independent and the other is dependent. The dependent cannot stand on its own. And the last thing in this little section here talks about there are many more subordinating conjunctions than coordinating conjunctions. So far too many to memorize, but do familiarize yourself with them, be able to recognize these. Kind of the main point is that if one of these starts a sentence, the sentence is incomplete if it doesn't have another clause with it. So after the sun came up, that's a subordinating conjunction, and we have a clause, the sun came up, but it's not a complete thought. So a lot of times knowing that these will turn a complete sentence incomplete if we were to put it at the beginning will help you recognize that it's a subordinating conjunction, not a coordinating conjunction. All right, let's see it in action. So coordinating. Lil loves nature, but she hates camping. All right, so the coordinating conjunction here is but. Well, what's going on with the sentence? So what we have here really are two sentences that have been combined. Lil loves nature, subject Lil, verb is love. Another sentence, she, subject, hates is the verb. We can't combine those together unless we have something in the middle. If we didn't have it, Liv loves nature, but Liv loves nature, she hates camping, would be a run-on sentence. There wouldn't be punctuation to join the parts. So, comma and coordinating conjunction. This is one of the fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. It is important to know what those coordinating conjunctions mean. Like the word but shows, contrast, opposition, that things are opposites. The word and shows that things are together. The word or shows that there are options. You're choosing one thing or another. All right, we have another example. I need to finish my report, so I must stay up late. This shows that one thing is the cause of another. There is the cause of a particular effect. So our sentence, we have the subject I, and then the verb need. Our second part, we have the subject I and the verb must. So bringing these two clauses or sentence parts together requires the comma and the coordinating conjunction. Okay, subordinating conjunctions. You're going to notice that we may or may not need to use a comma depending on how it's set up. So the first example, we went to the deli after we had practice. All right, so we know that it's a subordinating conjunction. How? Because it's not one of the coordinating conjunctions. It's not one of the fanboys. But we still do have two complete clauses that we've brought together. We went to the deli. We is the subject, went is the verb. Here in the next one, we is the subject, had is the verb. But in this case, the after, the subordinating conjunction turns the after we had practice part into a dependent clause. It couldn't stand alone. So, kind of another way to say it is the first half of the sentence, we went to the deli, could be its own complete sentence. But after we had practice cannot be its own complete sentence. And then our other example, Jake will watch his nephew tonight. There's some future verb tense, which he loves to do. So our subordinating conjunction here is which. It subordinates or makes this part of the sentence dependent upon the part that is independent. See, Jake will watch his nephew tonight. That could be its own sentence. Which he loves to do cannot be its own sentence anymore because we've subordinated it. We have made it dependent upon the independent portion of the sentence. Okay, here's our example. Look how coordinating and subordinating conjunctions can work together in the same paragraph. We plan to go hiking, but it rains. So that's a coordinating conjunction, one of our fanboys. And this one shows contrast or opposition. Like one thing was supposed to happen, but a different thing happened. Okay? Rather than waste the day, so, rather than a subordinating conjunction that starts off this clause, waste the day, but connects with we cleaned up the house, an independent clause. All right, so in the first example, we had a coordinating conjunction. It was set up correctly. We had a comma that preceded it. In the second sentence, we had a subordinating conjunction. And we don't put the comma after the conjunction, but rather between the two parts of the sentence, between the dependent and independent part of the sentence. So rather than waste the day, that's dependent or subordinate. We cleaned up the house could be its own sentence. And here at the bottom, we have a reminder of the fanboys. So in case you're having a little bit of difficulty remembering all 7, here they are for you. All right, we're skipping past the work to get to the last instructional part of this. And while there's not a whole lot of content on this page, it's a pretty important issue. Expect to have, some pretty substantial practice with this particular issue beyond just what I'm doing in these videos. And so after you finished watching them, do make sure that you're doing the additional work, the worksheets that I have attached for you to do. Follow the instructions on how to complete and submit those. Okay, so this section is about sentence structures. And we actually are just dealing with 3 of them here. There are 4 we normally deal with. I know that there are 4 things in the list, but one of them is not a sentence structure. It's a mistake. But sentence structure is a really important part of grammar. In fact, I say it in class, knowing this is the key to pretty much all of English grammar, and therefore the language test, the TABE language test, or the GED language arts test. So learning about sentence structure and mastering it will bring you a long way towards mastering English grammar as a whole. It really will. Okay. So here we're producing simple, compound, and complex sentences. Don't worry if you don't know what they are yet, but you will soon. And kind of the main point of covering this topic is that when you're writing, it is a good idea to create variety in your sentences. You don't want them to sound all the same. You don't want to have the first grade reader effect of, see the dog run, the dog jumps over the fence, Sally and Freddie love watching their dog run. You can end up with a piece of writing that sounds very basic and very grade school if you don't learn sentence structure and learn how to create variety in your writing and in your sentences. Okay? Every day you come across different types of sentences as you read. The main types you likely see are simple, compound, and complex. Authors use all 3 types to add variety to their writing, and so should you. Simple sentences. They only have one independent clause. And an independent clause must have a subject and verb linked. Something that is a noun and a verb that noun is doing. Otherwise, it's a fragment. It's not a sentence at all. And so sometimes simple sentences can be difficult to differentiate between fragments. But a fragment's an incomplete sentence. It will be missing a subject or it will be missing a verb. It may have nouns and verbs in the sentence, but there won't be a link between them. So let's kind of look at the examples before I read the definitions. So simple sentence, Harry is going home today. So Harry is the subject, is going is the verb phrase. We don't have any other subjects or verbs in this sentence, therefore it's considered simple. All right, Paolo will leave tomorrow, another simple sentence. Paolo is the subject, will leave is the verb. We're picking up the base verb and the linking or helping verb that makes the verb tense as well. So we have 2 complete sentences. Both of them are simple. One subject, one verb. We could have 1 subject and 2 verbs. We could have 2 subjects and 1 verb. Either way, it's a simple sentence. But we've got 2, well, actually, let me talk about fragments before we move on to the others. Your fragment will be missing something, such as boots and an umbrella. There's no verb in this sentence. There are nouns, but none of them are working as a subject that's related to a verb in any way. So this is a fragment. It's an incomplete thought. It's a mistake. And there are a lot of questions on TABE and GED about identifying fragments as opposed to complete sentences. Okay, we got 2 more types. Compound sentences have at least 2 independent clauses, and the clauses are linked by a coordinating conjunction. I haven't really spent much time talking about what a clause is because it hasn't really appeared much in the content so far. But a clause is just a group of words that has a subject-verb relationship in it. There could be other words like adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, and so forth. But a clause must have a subject and verb relationship. An independent clause can be its own sentence. I think I've already said that. A dependent or subordinate clause cannot be its own sentence. So a compound is actually made of 2 independent clauses. Harry is going home today. And actually, our 2 simple sentences are the ones that we're using to combine into a compound sentence here. So take a look how it's done. Harry is going home today. Now we add a comma and one of the fanboys. But, one of those 7 will work in this scenario. Now, there's another way to punctuate these that you might know about with a semicolon, but we're not going to talk about that right now because we're trying to get used to using the coordinating conjunctions, the fanboys. Just make sure that in the sentence that the coordinating conjunction that is used is the one that's correct based on the meaning of the sentence. If it said Harry is going home today and Paolo will leave tomorrow, it kind of makes sense, but there's difference between going home today and then leaving tomorrow. So that's why we're using the word but to show difference or opposition. So 2 sentences that could stand on their own can come together to make a compound sentence. In the same way, we could break this compound sentence back into 2 simple ones. If we took the comma out, the coordinating conjunction, replace this period, then we'd have 2 sentences again. Okay, complex sentences are a little bit different. They're going to have one independent clause, kind of like these simple sentences, but they're also going to have a dependent or subordinate clause, one that cannot stand alone, but still has a subject-verb relationship. So check out this example of a complex sentence. When the rain stops, that's actually our dependent clause. And rain is our subject. Stops is our verb. But we have this when that turns it, or the adverb when, that makes this clause into something that cannot stand alone anymore. When the rain stops is an incomplete sentence. Harry will go home, however, is not an incomplete sentence. It's an independent clause. It's a simple sentence. It qualifies as all those things. Harry will go home. How did we make this dependent or subordinate clause a sentence? Well, we had to pair it with a clause that is independent. So, if you think about the relationship, let's say, between a parent and a small child, a small child should not go into a store on his or her own. They're not old enough to deal with what goes on in the store. But if you pair that subordinate or dependent child up with an independent adult who knows how to act and behave in a store and how to stay safe, then they can go in. It's kind of the same thing in grammar. Some sentences can stand on their own. They're independent. They have everything they need to be grammatically correct. Some clauses are not and have to be paired with clauses that are independent in order to stand grammatically. Okay. In the simple sentence examples, the ideas are complete. In the compound sentence example, but links the 2 ideas and turns them into kind of a compound complete idea. The sentences sound smoother when the 2 I's are connected with the right conjunction. And that's true. I would suggest that any writer should combine those 2 simple sentences into one compound. In the complex sentence, when the rain stops is a dependent clause. See, it can't stand on its own. The when adverb has caused that to happen. It needs the independent clause that follows it to make a complete sentence. All right, so we'll look at the example here. And we have examples of all 3 here. I am going food shopping. Simple sentence. The subject is I. The verb phrase is am going. Our second sentence. I will return at 4 p.m. and then I will make dinner. So we have a compound sentence here. I will return at 4 p.m. is an independent clause. Subject I. Verb will return. But then we have a comma in one of our coordinating conjunctions, one of our fanboys. This is the and. And then I will make dinner. So I is the subject of this clause. Will make is the verb. So we have combined them. And the adverb then works also. It doesn't turn it into a subordinate clause. Then I will make dinner is still a complete sentence. So 2 independent clauses joined together with the comma and coordinating conjunction and, one of the 7 fanboys. And then in this last example, we're going to have a complex sentence, subordinate clause and independent clause. After we eat, there's our subordinate or dependent clause. We, subject, eat, verb, and then we have this subordinating adverb after. And then we can pick up mom. There's our independent clause. We, subject, can pick is our verb phrase. So that's an independent clause, but the after we eat is not an independent clause. We can pick up mom could be its own sentence, unlike after we eat. And one thing to note before we leave this example, the comma, let's say I wanted to switch the order of the sentence, which is legal, to we can pick up mom after we eat. So dependent, then subordinate clause. When you flip it like that, you actually don't need the comma anymore. So in the real world, it might be a better idea to flip the sentence to have independent clause first and then subordinate clause. Why? Because you don't need the comma if you do it, and there's no reason to use commas that are unnecessary. So I would suggest that a writer in the real world probably revise this sentence to, we can pick up mom after we eat. All right. Well, that actually finishes up the instructional part of Strategy 3, and it's a good thing. I've been going for over 30 minutes here. But just like we always do, after you finish this video, go back and do the work, the guided practice, the independent practice, the TABE practice, all of the questions where you're asked to do something, and do all 3 pages that go with the lesson. I've worked through all 3 sections, or I've talked through all 3 sections. So do your best with these 3 pages of work, and when you're finished, click on the answers video that goes with Language E Strategy 3, and I'll walk through the answers with you. And if you haven't been watching those answer videos, well, you should, because there's just as much teaching that goes on in the answer videos as in the instructional videos, and even in a more practical sense, because we're looking at actual examples. All right, I will talk to you in a few minutes after you've completed this work.